William, you started to say this a minute ago. I presume you said worst case scenario, we could just bring Coach Simpson in on voice, right?
Coach Haywood, yeah, we can just bring him on.
Our Coach Haywood, I'm sorry. Okay. Now take your time, Coach. You're good to go.
Did you give Coach Haywood my number?
Okay.
There he is. We got
William,
Coach Haywood.
Coach just tapped in. Did you pick him up?
Yeah, we got Coach Haywood.
All right, that's a
Hey, there he is.
Yeah.
There he is.
All right, Coach. I'm gonna go ahead and hang up my phone and take it off Wi-Fi here.
We can thank my wife in the picture here for getting all this lined out
Let's get Coach Simpson on. Would be good.
when it's time. Okay.
William, we seem to be okay. What do you think?
Yeah, we just need Coach Simpson. Is he on? Can you hear me, John? Hello, hello, hello.
William, you have me on audio?
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, John? Hello, hello.
William, you there?
Here, here, here. Hello?
You got me now? William, I don't have any audio.
Test, test, test. Peyton, get out of here.
Went off there for a minute.
Hello, hello. Coach Haywood, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Now
Coach Haywood
it
hears
seems
me.
to be back. Do you have audio yet?
Yeah, we got Coach Haywood. I've got you, John, and we're just waiting on Kenny Simpson. His feed's off, but Coach Haywood's on.
Well,
There's
Okay,
Coach
there's
Simpson.
Coach Simpson.
There he is.
William, I have no audio. My video's working fine, but I've got no audio. And I've checked the computer; it's good.
well, we can hear you.
Hold on, guys. I'm gonna call John real quick. I apologize.
No problem.
Hey, I'm not sure what's going on.
Hey, so we can hear you. You just can't hear us. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I've got nothing, and I checked to make sure that I'm not, that I'm not muted. I don't know. This particular problem has never come up before. You think it would help if I just back out and try again?
Yeah, that's
From the beginning.
yeah. Just try to relink, see what happens.
Okay, I'll do that real quick. Stand by.
All right. Stand by, guys. He's gonna try to relink here.
Sure.
It's got everybody on except for me. I'm on video, but it's my audio. Okay, you got me now?
John, can you hear us?
I can hear you, William.
Guys, you want to give John a test just so he can hear you?
Hello.
John.
Okay, I think I heard both Coach Simpson and Coach Haywood. Coach Haywood, you hear me okay?
Yes.
Technology,
you-
man. We're having it's a
Yeah.
little crazy tonight.
Yeah, it really is. Well, now that we've got everybody on, William, you're going to go ahead and run your intro, right?
Yeah, unless you just want to get onto it. It's up to you.
I tell you what, if you don't mind, just for posterity's sake, I wouldn't mind. I mean, we can always clip the beginning of this so when it republishes,
Okay.
it comes out right. But gentlemen, what I'd like to do is William has a short intro video that he's, and then when we come back on, in the interest of context, I am going to need a short bio for each of you, and then we'll get right into the questions that I sent and some more stuff about the book. So I'm excited. Screen will go out in a minute, and we'll do the little intro piece, and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome in. My name is John Davis. I'm the host of For the Good of the Game podcast. I'm sorry we're getting started a little late tonight, but special thanks to our two coaches as guests tonight and their perseverance in us getting started. And thanks to our great producer, William Warfield, and Prep Spin Media for the patience of working through the issues that we had. Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of context, I'm going to read a quick bio for our two guests tonight because it's important based on what we're going to discuss that you've got a good understanding of where these gentlemen have been. Coach Kenny Simpson is the oldest of 5 siblings and the son of a retired Air Force colonel. His book, Find a Way, has the byline, What I Wish I'd Known When I Became a Head Football Coach. In my opinion, The book epitomizes his style as part of a new generation of football coaches who not only develop athletes and coach the game of football, but who are true students of the game and do all they can to grow the game by teaching others. Coach Simpson currently serves as the head football coach for Southside High School in Batesville, Arkansas. Prior to his arrival, Southside had never won more than 3 games in a season. In 2017, Coach Simpson was a finalist for the Hooten's Coach of the Year in 4A. That same year, Southside achieved a school record 10-win season, and Kenny was named the 4A-2 Coach of the Year. Prior to coaching at Southside, Coach Simpson was the head football coach at Alabama Christian Academy in Montgomery, Alabama. He successfully turned around that program and for his efforts was recognized as the Montgomery Advisors All-Metro Coach of the Year, as well as the 4A Region 2 Coach of the Year. Coach Simpson began his coaching career at Madison Academy in Huntsville, Alabama. In 2001, he married wife Jamie, and the couple has 3 children, Avery, Braden, and Bennett. Coach Philip Haywood truly fits in the category of legendary coaches. He's the winningest coach in Kentucky history with 449 wins and a career record of 449 and 138 over a span of 45 years. Prior to the 2019 season, Max Preps ranked him as the 5th among top 25 winningest coaches in the nation. Coach Haywood has been honored by his peers on numerous occasions, being named the Louisville Courier-Journal's Coach of the Year 5 times, and either the Class 2A or 3A Coach of the Year 8 times. In 2013, he was voted USA Today's best high school football coach, and yes, that's in the nation. In 2016, he was inducted in the Kentucky Athletic Hall of Fame and the National High School Coaches Association Hall of Fame. Now, Philip Haywood is the head football coach at Belfort in Belfry, Kentucky. His book, Faith, Family, and Football, a life story vehicle of his career in coaching, reads a bit like the football version of Jimmy Stewart's It's a Wonderful Life. There's tragedy and triumph. There are setbacks and successes, but more important than any titles or accolades, it's one man's humble journey to grow not only a traditional football powerhouse program, but also a community of faithful followers. Coach Philip Haywood is married to wife Linda, and the couple has 2 daughters, Melissa and Jacqueline, and as well as 4 grandchildren. So I apologize up front to our coaches who are both humble guys. I really wasn't here to try and pump them up as much as give people a good idea of the accomplishments and the focus for both you gentlemen. So I'd like to say welcome, Coach Simpson and Coach Haywood.
Thank you for having me.
Now, coaches, you may notice just based on what we're seeing so far, there's a little bit of a lag on the screens. So as we bounce back and forth, you may want to just allow for that. Give it a second in between questions. I want to start out, the topic for tonight is really about building program culture and team character. And if a general definition of culture is the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or social group, how do you articulate the culture that you seek to engender in your program? And Coach Haywood is the senior guy here. I'm going to give the floor to you first.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a lot longer definition than we have. I'll say that. Sometimes I think ours is really very, very simple. We just try to get our kids to work hard, do the right thing, and believe that if you do those things, eventually. And I've tried to live my life that way. I believe the same things with me personally, but I've also believed the same thing in individuals' lives and about our program too. That I think that if you just keep pouring in the right things into yourself and into your program, that eventually good things are going to come out of it.
Coach Simpson, how about you?
Well, first of all, man, I can't even believe I'm on the same screen with this guy after what you read about him, and I just want to learn and listen from what he's doing. And that's the cool thing I think about the coaching community is you got coaches like this is a legend. He's on here with a guy like me, but we can hopefully talk to the next generation of coaches that are coming up. So, but to your question, I agree with Coach. One, I'm a football coach, so we don't complicate too many things with our athletes. But I really agree a lot with what Coach said about the way you live your life. I think you have to exemplify what you're asking your athletes to be, especially the new generation of players. They can see right through guys that are not genuine, and you have to be who you are. And so, if you're going to preach core values of culture, you have to be there and show them that. So if you're going to ask your kids to work hard, if you're going to ask your kids to have integrity, you better show that. And I think that's one of the things we try to do in our program. To me, the other deal with culture is if I wasn't there with our players and somebody walked in and asked them what we're about, what they're going to tell that kid, that's what our culture is. Whether I like it or don't like it, that's what it is. And so allowing your kids to grow to become leaders is a huge thing that I try to do. My goal is to get them in the seventh grade and work with them as much as I can so that by the time they're seniors, I want them to run the team. I want kind of like your own child. As they get older, you want them to gain that responsibility. So that's a few things that we try to do.
Yeah, I do want to point out, and both you gentlemen, having read your books and really gotten inside at least what you were able to share in the written word, for our audience, it's the kind of thing that it doesn't have to come out in the written word. You don't have to necessarily outwardly profess it. I think, as you both touched on, the way you live your life, your faith and your values will come through. And I think that I got a good feel for both you gentlemen in the foundation that you place in, your faith and how that plays a part of your everyday life in setting those examples and everything you talk about. I've heard character defined as the mental and moral qualities, distinct individuals, so a good reputation. Um, Coach Coach Haywood at Belfry, over the years, what type of values have you tried to reinforce so that individually those players get to a collective team character when they're on and off the field?
But one of the things that we'll specify different character traits, especially early in the year. And of course, they're going to hear them, as Coach said, all the way through the program. And hopefully by the time they're older players, I realize you had to say, I think these younger guys articulate better than I do. So I really appreciate that. But we try to get them to understand certain character traits of discipline and what I call caring about your teammates. Those are things that we're going to talk about. And like lots of times at the beginning of the year, I'll have each one of our assistant coaches address the team. And they'll take a character trait and talk about it, and give examples about it. They want a player or two and let them stand up and say a little bit about what it means to them and what it's meant to play, for 3 or 4 years, to be a part of Belfry football in our case. So I think character is huge. John Wooden, we all know about his legacy and so forth, said a lot about character, but it's been said that it's who you are when no one's watching. Are you doing the right things? Which goes back to the very first thing I said, are your little things right? And are you doing it when nobody's watching you? And I think to me, that's the great thing about character. And the last thing I'll say about that is that I think character is really a choice. There's a lot of things in life we don't have a choice about. Maybe where we were born, who our parents are, kind of circumstances we're in, those things. But our character and our attitude, we have a choice. And so we try to instill in our players and in our coaches' lives and in our entire program that it's our choice to do the right thing. It's our choice to be the kind of players and kind of team and represent our school the way we should represent our school. And it's an ongoing process.
Absolutely. Coach Simpson, you talk about a section of your book, you talk about, and you touched on this already, is being able to simplify. The game of football can be very complex, certainly at the higher levels. it can be made to be complex. But at the lower levels and probably up through high school, it's better to simplify. Uh, Simplicity tends to be a key ingredient to success versus creating confusion. Um, how do you think at how do you choose to deal with that kind of on a daily basis with this generation of players? Um, Today it's important for kids to understand why they're doing things. Maybe not back, when you played, and certainly not when I played. I didn't question why. The coach said jump, I said how high. But nowadays, kids want to know why. So, how do you deal with that in terms of keeping it simple but still being able to explain so that the players buy in?
Yeah, that's tough especially when you move towards character. As far as X and O wise, I've been a big believer in this more you shrink the game for the kid and let him know his role, the better they're going to play. I'm a firm believer. I mean, you look at like Oklahoma, they're a very simple what they do, and they're very successful. So I believe you can be simple and teach your kids. Coach mentioned all the little things. Do the little things you can control right. And so we try to bleed that into our program. I try a lot of times, kids don't want to be talked at. They want to feel like you care about them, and they want to feel like you're with them. So sometimes as coaches, I've fallen to this and I still have to struggle with it. I want it to be about me. And so I'd complicate things that don't necessarily need to be complicated. Let's keep it simple for our kids, and let's make sure they're very clear on their goals of what we're asking them to do. And when it comes to character, we're very simple. We say, I tell them the difference in a boy and a man is that a boy does what he wants to do and a man does what he has to do. And that's all we talk about as far as character is, you've matured when now you're doing things that you may not necessarily want to do, but there's something you understand you have to do for the betterment of our team. And I don't know if that goes with your kind of simple philosophy, but we try to use practical things for our kids so they can see that and maybe apply it down the road.
Yeah, to Coach Haywood's point, I've heard it said, the way you do anything is the way you'll do everything. And sometimes we tend to focus on too much detail. But I asked that context of the fact that, I was not taught to do a pre-read quarterback until I got into college in 1977. And nowadays, that's an integral part of the game for eighth graders. I mean, so the sophistication level of the game has been brought down to way below what it used to be. And Coach Haywood, just in reading your book and the account of all of the games that you talk about throughout the book, it's apparent that even though that simplicity may be very basic, you guys have a system, and into that system has been very successful. I want to go back to something that you started your book with, Coach Haywood. The very first chapter is called Overcoming Tragedy, and you tell about the story of a young man named Stuart Wright, that was injured in a game. How do you think that tragedy early in your kind of shaped the way you approach the things that we deal with today with regard to like risk and taking chances from an athletic standpoint?
Well, that incident's probably had the biggest impact on me in coaching than anything that could have happened. And when a young man is paralyzed on your watch, and I was 25 years old, I was a young guy, and you just didn't hear about that kind of thing. The social media wasn't out there, and so it floored me. Now, the impact, you don't understand the impact something like that has until it happens to you, because it impacts the player and the family and your team and the community, the school, and it sure as heck impacts you, especially if it's never crossed your mind. It just floored me. And the difficulties this young man went through and the relationship we developed over the years. I could talk about this 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to answer your question. in the sense that I fought through the adversity just as he did. I questioned myself. Hey, do I want to keep coaching this game? It's what I love to do. I knew I was destined to do it my whole life by the time, earlier than at that time in my life. It's what I wanted to do. But at the same time, you had to fear, well, what if? What if? So you've got these doubts in your mind. Our kids have those doubts in their mind. And we had to work through all those things. So it was a long process. It wasn't something you worked through in 2 or 3 weeks. It probably took 2 or 3, 4 years. I felt like before the sun was shining again on our program to work through those things. But within that context, you go through things that we're talking with coaches tonight. That you go through attorneys, you go through all kinds of stuff that you just never imagined you're going to be dealing with. And fortunately, I was so fortunate that we taught tackling the right way, and we'd gone about the process the right way. And I look back and say, gosh, what if, what if I'd done this? I was a young guy, didn't have a whole lot of training. In those days, you just kind of went out and coached, and you did what somebody else showed you to do. And I've been with a couple of good programs, which really, really helped me as far as doing the right thing. And I was with some great mentors, but you get into some things that you don't really think about. So from my standpoint on safety, I was probably way ahead of the game. I was doing paperwork, permission forms, things like that, long before the state of Kentucky used to do it, make everybody do it. I started my own. I realized that you had to have some paper trail to get permission for kids to play and different things like that. So I just realized that it is a safe game, and the number one thing, it's the greatest game in the world. I think we all realize that. It teaches so many values to kids, but at the same time, we need to be safe with our kids. Go out to practice. If turf, we have turf. If we think it's too hot, and we say, man, we'd really like to practice after school today, but is it safe for our kids? Well, that's a no-brainer. We're going to come in late. Our kids are going to have to go home and come back at 6 or 6:30, and then we'll have a practice then. So whether it's that or the way we tackle or the way we practice or how long we practice, it's all about the safety issue. And I was introduced to that in not a real positive way early in my career, but it had a big impact on me.
Yeah, I briefly, before you got on, Coach Simpson and I were chatting about, what we're living through right now. I think that coming out of this pandemic, we are probably in maybe the entrance to the most critical decade in my lifetime in terms of youth sports, not just football, but youth sports in general. Of course, with sports like football, contact sports, all of the restrictions and or risk assessments that we're having to do because of coronavirus are going to affect so many different facets of the game, from preparation to practice to obviously playing the game. So it's going to be interesting to see coaches are forced to adjust and how programs make adjustments. I want to kind of bounce back and forth here with a couple of questions specific to your books, because these are things that as I wrote down the word nugget near in the leaf or on the page of that I was reading. And one of those for you, Coach Simpson, is it goes back a little bit to culture, but it's more, you touched on it a minute ago, talking about the 7th grade. In one of the chapters, you discuss youth football and what you've done in the past. And I saw this here in central and western Kentucky when I was coaching. We would try and reach out as best we could to the feeder schools and help out where we could. But unique to the military community here on Fort Knox, we did not have a middle school program that fed Fort Knox High School when I was helping coach there. So address that a little bit in terms of the value of reaching down into those, younger levels, both middle school and below, and how you can help, your program in the long run by getting involved at that level.
Yeah, I think the last thing you said is the most important thing, is the long run. And as a younger coach, I just want to win on Friday night, and I wasn't looking past 1 year. And as I've aged, now perspective kicks in and you start to realize, one, that the kids you're coaching, you're still, I loved Coach's story about he still was communicating with that young man after he left his program. Because I think we just, when we're coaches forever. I mean, they don't ever leave our program. But it also works the other direction. You've got to reach those kids when they're young. You mentioned it. Youth football can be a good thing. It can also be a really bad thing if done wrong. You can have injuries. You can have guys that don't know what they're doing. And these are dads. They're not trying to hurt kids. But if you don't take a vested interest and teach them, then that can, one, kids can get hurt. And two, it can seriously hurt your program. And then the whole part of what we're talking about tonight is culture. Well, I want to start that as young as possible. I want to teach the kids what our core values are as young as we can.
Yeah, I think that if in the case of where programs have enough to the middle schools where they can actually reach down buy-in from those middle school coaches and start running their schemes prior to the kids getting there, it benefits you as as you bring them up and grow the programs. Coach Haywood, you talked about in the chapter of your book on mindset, you really hit on this in terms of kind of what going back to what we started with and talking about culture. You mentioned Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, which I know for me, I started my personal development journey kind of late in life. I retired from the military in '05, and I really started focusing on improving me every day about 3 years ago. And her book was really seminal in the 50 to 80 books that I've read over the last couple of years. How do you think that mindset piece is? How is it easiest to teach and promote that within a program at your level? And how have you done that at Belfry, do you think? Who do you employ to try to grow that, the mindset that you think contributes to the right culture?
Well, I think that's a great book. My daughter introduced that to me. I don't know. She lives in Austin, Texas, and her faculty had looked at it and said, "Hey, Dad, you might be interested in this." And I read it, and the next thing, pretty soon, our faculty at our school was using it as a summer reading. Great book. And I read another one recently called Grit. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but this girl speaks about that book in her studies, and it's one of the best books I've read since then. But I've always been I've got a counseling degree, so I know a little bit about psychology and some things like that. And I've always believed the power of the mind is going to be greater than the power of the body because it's our beliefs and the way we think that drives our behavior. So I believe that if you can get into your coaches' minds, your players' minds, and your community's minds and the way they think about things, that you can change a culture. And I was fortunate that Belfry was always kind of a football community. I mean, I didn't come into what you could say is a bad program. They've always been a good program. And my goal was just to take it a little bit higher. And we've been able to do that. We've been able to do that by changing the mindset of being pretty good to becoming a championship program. And you have to be able to do that by constantly saying we're playing for a championship this year, by saying this is our goal of being the very best we can be, and on the way, let's win it all. If we don't, we're going to come very close. But you got to get a lot of people believing in that, and right now our community, because I've been here a while and we've had some pretty good accomplishments, they believe those things. They don't ever think that we're out of the running, that by the end of the year, we're going to be able to be okay. So mindset, the idea of a growth mindset is so important. And I just feel like so many of our young people have this idea, well, I can't and I won't. And I think football coaches have growth mindsets. I love football coaches because they all think, hey, we can do this, we can get better, I can learn this tomorrow. We're always open to change. I think that's a great thing about coaches. And I think our players sometimes have to be trained that way, though. I think sometimes they come in with baggage, you might say, from home or past environments and circumstances. So it takes a lot of working and cajoling and pushing, But I also think it takes a lot of talking with them and just explaining to them things work and how they think things and how we've got to change the way you think about things if you're really going to be successful. And our kids have bought into it, and our coaches have bought into it, but it's an every year thing. It's not something that just stays. I think it's constant because kids come in with the same issues every year.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that you've got to reinforce. And as long as you've been at Belfry and being able to, as they say, turn that battleship over a period of years, it's valuable to be able to have a community behind you because, when the proverbial old men are sitting at the barber shop on Saturday mornings talking about the game, and you've just lost one or two at the beginning of the season, you tend to get their support as opposed to their criticisms because they know you've done it before and you can do it again. It's just a matter of getting that buy-in. So I
Well, we
do
share their
believe
criticism, though.
that's funny. Well, everybody's an armchair quarterback, and I think that one of the lessons I learned early on, and you both touch on this in your books, and I recently interviewed a good friend of mine, Coach Mark Evans, who has Manheim Township High School in Pennsylvania, and Mark is also a school counselor, and we discussed the value of relationships and communication, and you both touch on that as being very important because nowadays, as opposed to 2 or 3 decades ago when either it wasn't spoken about openly or maybe it wasn't as prevalent. Nowadays, every kid's got an issue. You don't know if a kid has the right, home life, whether or not they ate breakfast that morning or dinner the night before. You don't know if they're getting support from the parents or parent. So it's very valuable that you and your staffs know and kind of have an intimate understanding of what each kid's going through. Coach Simpson, I'll throw this one to you first. Kind of like you to, talk about your approach to that in terms of building those relationships throughout each season and over the course of a 4-year period when kids play for your program.
Yeah, relationships are king. There's a lot of coaches that are really good with X's and O's, but if you don't get your players to understand that you care about them beyond just a game, then you're never going to get their maximum effort. And you hit on it. Times are changing. The area I'm dealing with, we're probably at over 50% that don't really have a male role model, and so a lot of times it's easy to just cast those kids out, but the reality is they've never had anything modeled to them. And so as a coach, you need to identify that. And then you also need to figure out they learn different. I learned through reading, which is why I wrote a book. I learned through visual, but a lot of these kids, they learn kinesthetically or they learn auditory, so you need to kind of figure out how they learn to maximize what they can do. And so, for me, the more important thing is, we are trying to raise a generation, and sometimes, right or wrong, that falls to the coach because there's nobody at home. And so we have to step up to the plate and do that. And the second thing is, obviously, to coach them, you need to know who they are and how they learn. I've got 3 of my own children, and coach has 2 of his own, and they learn very differently. And so because I know that, I know how to treat them. And you have to do the same thing with your players. We don't lower the standard. We just find different ways to get them up to the standard is kind of how we view it.
And I think it's so critical in terms of the lifelong learning. Going back to Coach's comments about book mindset, and part of that learning takes place in those relationships. And I think that the degree to which all of this, as far as culture and character goes, is reinforced, having that community support and obviously the daily interaction with your kids and your staff, growing as a family is super important. So as far as the communication piece, Coach Haywood, you have several places in your book where you talk about the routine that you guys use regularly You reference it on game day, and you talk about it in several places when you recount certain years that you went through with teams. How do you guys incorporate the value of that routine and keeping your kids on a regular schedule with regard or in the context of that communication, as you go through an individual season?
Well, I'm like Coach. I think communication and relationships are the key to coaching. I've never considered myself to be the smartest coach in the world, but I do think I'm pretty good with relationships because I'll sit down and listen, and I think listening is probably the biggest key. And we all know that a youngster comes in to talk with a coach. He's not going to just start talking with you. Draw them out a little bit. You're going to have to ask some questions. So, one of the things that I've always done, and I did this my first year as a head coach, was I brought every player on the team. At that time, we only had 35 or so it wasn't too big of a problem. Now we're up in the 70s. We've dropped some since our schools got smaller, but I make an effort to meet with every kid. I just think it's important to develop a relationship, at least the beginnings of one. And I've had my coaches started to do this too. I didn't always do that. I want you to formally meet with them. I want you to talk with them about goals. I want you to talk with them about what they want to do later on in life, because that's what I do. And let them understand that we're interested in them more than just as a football player, even though that may be their primary interest. I always tell them that, believe it or not, I'm really more interested in where you're going to be when you're 30 and 35 than I am today, but it's what you do today that's going to determine when you're 30 and 35. So it all works together. So we start off with that in January, and then we stay in communication with them. And always give our kids, I think Coach talked about that earlier about giving them a chance to lead. But one of the things I like to do, and I don't do it every week, but it could be a practice. Sometimes it's before a game. Sometimes I'll give them notice. Sometimes I don't. But I always like for our kids to have a chance to share their thoughts about playing football, about what it means to them. And I always tell them, talk from your heart. Don't talk from your head. Don't think you have to give a big speech. But basically, just say what it means to you. And that takes relationships. I think when you have issues, and you're going to have some, if you don't, you're doing something wrong. There's always going to be problems. So if when you have those, if you've got a pretty good relationship with your kids, and if you develop those character traits, respect and discipline and caring about each other, then those things will work out because in essence they know about them and they're going to care about you and the team. And so it all kind of goes back to that relationship communication that you start at the very beginning of the year. And over a 3 or 4 year period, you get to know your kids pretty good. They get to know you well. And hopefully, and it's been true for me uh, throughout my career, we have a number of players that come back regularly and talk to us where I've been here a long time and just let us know, what, how they're doing. Sometimes they tell us how important it is for them to have played, what it meant to them, how they apply it to their lives. And I think that's the fruits of what we do as coaches when kids start coming back later in life and sharing their thoughts about playing football and what they're doing today. It just meant something to them.
Just out of curiosity, coach, and I don't need you to bring up individual situations necessarily, but in a program like yours with the longevity that you've had and the culture that you've built, um, how often have you had to deal with a bad apple? And what type of steps have you had to take in the past where, you had to let a kid go, or maybe a kid kind of fires himself from the team?
Well, if I have to let one go, it's because they've fired themselves. I'll do anything I can to keep that kid because I think it's the best thing in the world for them. And sometimes I bend over backwards and I say I made a mistake. I should have cut this kid, last year or at the beginning of the season. But I just believe, on the other hand, I will say that by staying with the kid, I've had a lot more succeed than those that haven't. Like, I don't know, 30 to 1. It happens all the time. And a kid, you just think he's falling through the cracks. He's not going to make it. You give him one more chance. You lay it on the line, and sure enough, he became the player that you always dreamed he could be, the young person you always dreamed he could be. And that always gives you hope to reach out. I've just never been one of these cut and dried guys. Well, if you don't do this, you're through. I'll bend over backwards. We'll do behavior contracts. We do all kinds of things with them to try to keep them in the program. And if they have to leave, it's usually because they've basically put themselves off. They've just gone. They've put us under the bus. I'll tell you, I'll share this story with you. I don't think he would mind, but we had that situation. It was probably 5 6 years ago, and a young man basically put himself off the team, and it was tough. It was difficult because he'd been with us there for a while, but he came back to see me about, I don't know, 2 years ago maybe, and I sent word to me. Wanted to know if I'd come down and meet him in the parking lot. It was right before practice, and I didn't know exactly what he wanted. I wasn't sure what our relationship was, when those things happen. But he said, Coach, I just want to tell you that you were right in not letting me play. He said, I was totally wrong in everything I was doing. And what I want you to know is I've got my life together now. I've got a job. I'm working full time. I'm in church. I found the Lord. And I just want you to know that because I appreciate, what you've done for me in high school. So that was one of those that didn't work out, but came back and still appreciated being part of the program. And I don't know if everyone would feel that way. I'm sure there's some that probably hold a little something toward me in an ill manner. But sometimes I think for the integrity of the program, you might have to do things like that.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and it may be a little bit different situation uh, in a public school or in a rural setting. And Coach, and I know that you had recently posed that question to coaches on one of the groups we're members of. How do you think it affects it in when you were coaching at the Christian Academy or at a charter school like Southside, where the environment's a little bit different than from a student enrollment standpoint than what you find in a typical public school? How have you dealt with that kind of thing inside your system?
I never want to put a kid off. And I think he mentioned it. If you get to that point, generally they put themselves off because I'm 100% with coach that I will hold on to a kid probably longer than I should, as long as he's willing to listen and try to do as good as he can. That you just have to draw a line at some point where he's being more detrimental to the other 60 kids or so on the team. And even then, we'll put him off for that season and give him an opportunity the next off season, or put him off for, you try to leave a little bit of light. But like Coach mentioned, it's tough, man. I've got kids that I've had to put off, and now I'm old enough, and they've come back to me, and they knew I was right to put them off, and that's worked out well. But uh, to me, I feel like I lose any influence I might have on that kid the minute I put him off, and so that's always a last resort. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I'm not going to judge some other coach for what he does. I just would encourage coaches to think about, where is that kid going to be 20 years from now, before you really quickly, through your anger, rush to get rid of them. At least think it through and figure out something possibly before you resort to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. A fellow coach and friend of mine up in Seattle just recently posted in my Facebook group for the good of the game. He reposted the essay and videos by Coach Bill Curry entitled "The Huddle," which I have always revered. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Coach Curry uh, as a coach and a human being, but also the way that he weaves what football does for and represents as a microcosm or a metaphor for society, and how we can, and that I think all of us as coaches, all of us kind of hold that in high regard in terms of a privilege that you hold as a coach. And Coach Haywood mentioned in his book in two different places how, the title coach brings with it a degree of respect, even though you still have to earn that respect. The title itself carries a little bit with it. And I think it's important that if you understand the value of keeping that kid in the program because of all the things that they can learn and benefit from in terms of life skills, it's so much more beneficial to try and retain and possibly retrain. But you said it a minute ago, Coach Simpson. It's or you touched on it. It's you really help people who want to help themselves. And I think at sometimes, you got to make that tough call. I like to kind of switch over to something that, Coach Simpson, you talk about in the outset of your book. You see yourself as kind of a fix-it coach. I say that in air quotes. And Coach Haywood certainly has done a lot of this within the lifetime he's been both at Prestonburg but more so at Belfry. So, Coach Haywood, I'll throw this to you first. In terms of that culture, how important is it? Do you think it is with regard to those relationships in the community, with the faculty, with the business folks, the boosters, and so on, to get the thing that breathe new life into a program over time? Going from that grass to that turf field. In your case, you actually got a new high school at one point at Belfry. And I know you guys switched over, all of your facilities, but how important do you think that is in terms of growing your program and building and adding to that culture we're talking about?
Well, it's important. I think you've always got your basic philosophy. Uh, I met with parents my very first year at Belfry, and I gave them my little spiel, you might say, and it hasn't changed. It's exactly the same. Pull my notes out and say, I don't even have to look at notes. I know what I'm going to say because that's philosophy. That's what you build your program on. But I think you're always needing to interject new things to keep the program fresh. And it may be putting a picture in the weight room. And I'm a kind of a straight arrow kind of guy. I don't need pictures to motivate me. I'm motivated. My younger coaches said, Coach, these guys love this stuff. We need to do this. I said, okay, do that. Man, they're all excited about a picture in the weight room. So it's the little things. It's not a whole lot. So this year we did a type of we had some special sponsors last year. And so we got some sweatshirts and took those out into the community. And I'm going to, then the virus hit, so I didn't get them all delivered. But as soon as we can, we'll get out and get those out and thank people for their efforts. Sometimes we'll bring them in for a dinner and thank them in different ways. Just little things that you can do. We have a youth football camp, but we hold it usually every year, sometimes every other year. We do it for free. We'll buy the insurance and get the T-shirts. We may get a sponsor, we may not. But we always think that that's one way we can give back to the community, that it's not always about money and things, that this is just a public service of Belfry football, that we're not out here for the money. We want to give back to you. And I think those are the kind of things that develop good community relations, something a little bit different. Sometimes we change our camp around. We've done it different times of the year, different ways. We'll have a different kind of a fundraiser. We started something 6 or 8 years ago we'd never done before, and everybody really knows we're still doing it. So you want tradition, you want it to stay the same, but you got to have some little subtle injections of some energy, some new things to keep things going. Music on Friday nights from the PA, which we used to never have. Just little things like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of those are helpful in terms of building momentum. Coach Simpson, you've had a pretty good run in terms of the things you've been able to accomplish, and I don't say this juxtaposed to what Wood just said, but as far as the material improvement, some programs are in dire need of that in order to build momentum. And you talk about that as some of the things that you didn't know when you were a head or didn't know when you became a head coach. How do you typically approach those kind of things to keep that momentum going within the program?
Well, there's a few things. We can't always control our situation. Coach referenced that early on. What we can do is we can take pride in whatever we're blessed with. And so, whatever that is, we're going to be prideful in it. And so, we tell our kids, I don't mind going out and asking our community to give money to help us. I really have no problem with that because it's going to their children. But we are not going to ask for money if we're not taking care of what we've already been blessed with. And so, we've had tremendous success here of involving our community. And I think it's one of those deals Coach mentioned on there is the message is simply to give our kids the best we can. And it can be a different way you get there. We are fortunate with a lot of great facilities. It took a while because the community wanted to pour into our kids. But we take our kids and we go serve our community. And this year, we've got all this stuff going on. So we're telling all our businesses, if you've ever helped us before, there's no cost this year. We'll put you in our media guide. We're going to give back because you gave to us. And I think it's small things like that that show that, hey, we do care for you and that we're part of it. And I think that does help a long way. It definitely builds a pride. The programs I've taken over struggled with pride, and that was a way to do that was, let's upgrade our facilities. Let's make it an event on Friday night. Is that my favorite thing? I'm with Coach. I don't care about pictures. I don't care about music. I care about playing football. But does it help the kids? Yes. And does it hurt what I'm trying to do? No. So fine, let's go ahead and do that because it's a means to an end.
Well, and it's a little bit different situation. Obviously, if you guys were college coaches, all of those things talking about from a outward material standpoint represent something in the recruiting process. It helps, lure kids in. I mean, I was blown away the first time I went to University of Georgia's weight room or went and paid a visit to the brand new renovated facility at University of Cincinnati. But those are programs with donors up in the millions of dollars. And at the high school level, I think sometimes the more little subtle changes are the ones that can build more bang for the buck. And it's great when you get a new stadium or a new field or new lights or whatever. But as Coach said, sometimes maybe that picture in the weight room is going to do just the right thing. I don't know. I guess it depends on who the picture's of. I touch on something that is certainly a very comfortable area for you based on your lives and reading your books and the way that you've done things. I'll put it under the heading of a general heading of faith. I've heard it said that our life is God's gift to us, but how our lives is our gift to God. And I think that a big part of mind, body, and spirit is faith on many different levels. Coach Haywood touched on it when he was talking about mindset. It starts with a belief. It starts with the belief in yourself, in your program, in your coaching staff, in whatever you're doing. But that whole mind, body, spirit piece is so essential, in my opinion, to long-term success. Coach Haywood, how do you see that play out on a basis in terms of, when you look around and you're prepping for any given day, how do you think about those things as you go through your daily routine since you've been there a while and had a chance to foster that type of environment?
Well, I think faith for me personally, I think it all starts within you. I think leadership starts within you, but I think everything for me starts with the faith inside of me. And I think it was brought to with that injury to Stuart Wright that I found that hey, I'm not going to get through this on my own. I need something bigger and greater than me, which was God. And with his help, I was able to get through that and get our kids through it. It was a difficult situation. And, throughout my career, I talk with our kids using those words you did a lot about mind, body, and spirit. We're all three. You can't separate the three. And you can't just concentrate on one and leave the others apart because we're not made that way. So it's important for us to be able to address each one One of the things that I really emphasize, and Coach Simpson said the same thing, is about it can't be about me. And it can't be about you. It's got to be about us. And that's one of the things I tell our kids frequently. They hear that a lot, that it's bigger than us. And I think with faith, as you go through a coaching career, at some point, you realize what your purpose is. And you can do this in other careers as well. It's not just in coaching. At the point, first we're all energetic and enthused. We just want to coach, win a few games, and have a blast out there. But the more you do it, the passion starts growing inside of you, and it turns into a purpose that's really bigger than you. And when you get lost in that purpose, that's when your spirit starts to mesh with God's spirit, and you find out that hey, this is what I was meant to do to begin with. It just took me however many years to figure this out. That was maybe God's plan for me. So I think our careers and our families and our faith all tied together, and it's just a matter of us working, you might say, out the details in our spirit to tie the rest of it to that. And I try to tie that all that in with our kids, and many of them will come back about those things later on in life. I think one of the things that they will share with me, and with our coaches too, it's not always just me, they may share with one of our coaches, is where they are spiritually when they're in 35, that they've come to know Jesus, or they've got into that kind of a framework in their life. One is, I think they know it's important to me and to a lot of our staff, but I think they've also realized that hey, they understand that mind, body, spirit thing, and they've kind of started putting it all together, and they want to share that with us as well as some of the other things they're doing in life.
Yeah, and I know very gratifying. I've had it happen on a limited basis in both athletics as well as in the military, and it was always very gratifying to me when a soldier would share, some degree of a common event that happened to them uh, because of whether it was my leadership or the team or the environment that we had built. So I appreciate that a lot. Coach Simpson, in terms of that philosophy and what Coach Haywood just talked about, um, how do you think, in your time coaching so far, how do you think that kids kind of relate to that in general, just with the societal changes that you've seen in your young career? I say not young, compared to Coach Haywood's longevity. I think we all kind of got a few years on the treadmill before we reach his status. But is how do you feel like it is? Have you learned maybe different ways inside that equation to kind of communicate with the kids now versus say a decade ago or 15 years ago?
Well, I would definitely say your perspective changes. First of all, it's unbelievable listening to Coach talk. I'm just writing notes over here because this stuff is going to help. I mean, so much just for me to listen to. But the kids are the same. They want something. They want a purpose. They want something larger than themselves. That has not changed. Unfortunately, sometimes in our society, we don't offer a lot of opportunities for that. Football is one of the few that is left, in my opinion. I mean, we're one of the few areas that a young man can go to learn all these character traits, to be selfless, to sacrifice, to serve something bigger than himself. And we have such a platform as coaches to do that. That has not changed. As long as we coach, that won't change. That's the kind of, if you're willing to use it for that. Sometimes the methods to reach and teach them have become more difficult. Social media has made it very difficult to get kids to think about things that are more than just themselves. That's been tough. But honestly, if social media was around when I was a teenager, I would have struggled with the same things. And so they have a lot more opportunities to do a lot of different things. That part has changed. And so as a football coach, in my opinion, we're challenged with making our program about more than just winning a game or statistics. If we don't do that, then these kids have hundreds of other things they can go do. And so that we have to do that if we want these kids to realize why football is so important. And it's not just because it's a game, it's because of all the life lessons it can teach. And I think that has not changed. You just have to be intentional with teaching these things.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I just recently went through a 6 week coaching and mentorship program that was run by uh, John O'Sullivan, who founded Changing the Game Project. And the the in his book, uh, Every Moment Matters, he really emphasizes what you guys both represent and what you all have talked about without necessarily using the words. And that is that when you compare coaches who are do as I say, not as I do, win at all cost type of coaches, do they teach the game of football and potentially have short term success? Yes, but they are transactional coaches. You're going to come play for me, and I am going to teach you something, and you're going to do it my way, and hopefully we go win. Whereas the mold that you guys fit in and have built in the programs you've been a part of, you represent transformational coaches. And in my mind, that is the more important distinction at any level, whether it's youth, 10-year-olds, or college coaches for that matter. And it's about changing people's lives through the game of football and the experiences and life skills that it offers as a platform. And I just think both of you gentlemen represent the very epitome of what that's about. And I applaud what you've accomplished in your efforts so far. I want to be somewhat sensitive to time, even though we started late. Believe it or not, we've been at it for just about an hour, a little under an hour. And I want to be able to give each of you the floor and give you a chance to kind of finish up and gather your thoughts. And Coach Simpson, I'm going to ask you to go first, if you would. The title of the program is For the Good of the Game, and I chose that specifically because I think that at every level there are so many things that we can learn, but ultimately it's when, as you gentlemen have both touched on in the last 5 minutes, when you are playing for something bigger than yourself, when you give in to the team and it's we and not me, and the purpose is larger than putting a W on the scoreboard, it means something. So from a standpoint, or from the perspective of For the Good of the Game, um, Coach Simpson, I'm going to ask you, if you would, to address athletes. If you're talking to a young man, either in your program or maybe one considering to move into your program, what type of message would you want to share about, how football can help them and what your program could do for them from that For the Good of the Game perspective?
Sure. The first thing that we tell our players is that I'm going to love them if they give me all they have, and I'm going to give them all I have, regardless of if we go 10-0 or 0-10. I don't. That doesn't matter to me as long as we're giving the best effort we can. Generally, when you do that, things work out well. Our goal is from 7th grade to 12th grade to see them grow so that when they go out into the world, they represent their family well, they represent our community well, and that they've learned some lessons they can carry along with them. Finally, we'll tell them football hits, but it doesn't hit nearly as hard as life does. And you're going to go through a lot of really tough trials, and this is a good chance for you to experience with us, to fail with us, and to learn with us, because that's what's going to happen when you become an old man like me. That's what we really try to stress with our kids is if we do that stuff, then wins or losses generally take care of themselves.
I love it. And I too have found that, if your purpose is true, while you may make mistakes and you may fail along the way, normally having that true purpose to guide you leads to some level of success. Coach Haywood, I could ask you a million questions. I got to tell you, I actually finished your book this morning about 5:30, and I was on my second cup of coffee. I get up at 4 a.m. every day, and I spend some quiet time, hopefully trying to make me better. If I can improve every day, if you, from For the Good of the Game standpoint, There were so many areas in my mind I thought that I would talk to you about, but I want to ask you to kind of close with this thought. From the same perspective, Coach Simpson talked about a young person that might be coming into his program. From a for the good of the game perspective, what would you say to aspiring young football coaches out there, and maybe even coaches in any sport, but certainly football, since that's been your life's work, when they think to get into it, whether it's at the youth level or high school or whatever, what type of things should they think about and allow to guide their decisions as they go through their career?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, and this is a very tough question to ask when you're young, because I don't know if I asked this, and I alluded to it earlier, but what's your purpose? Why do you want to be a coach? And examine yourself a little bit. Is it just about the excitement of the game, or because you played it somewhere in the past, or you just love football? And we have a lot of guys, and I'm sure Coach does too, that come back in the program that want to help. Maybe they're in college and they say, "Yeah, let me help a year or two. I really love this." And whether they go on to coach or not's another thing. But we've had a lot of guys that do that, and they come back to work in our program and stay with us. And we've got a lot of continuity with coaches in our program in this same area, because they've really loved what they do, and they've kind of got a calling about it. And they talk with me about that they think it's bigger than the game. It's bigger than just coaching. So I think in coaching, you got to examine, what you want to do, and what your purpose is, and what are some of your goals. I think it's also important for young coaches to have mentors. I think you need somebody that's older and wiser than you. I think one of the biggest mistakes when I was young, and it wasn't just young. I mean, I did this for a long time. I think some of the worst mistakes I've made is because I thought that I was the head coach and I had to make the decision myself. And I was either too embarrassed or ashamed, or just thought I shouldn't have to ask this question, that I just didn't pick up the phone and call someone that might have been able to give me some direction in that. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot better about that. So I think you have to have some humility in coaching. I think you have to ask yourself, why you're doing it, and do you really have a passion for kids? Do you really care about them? Because that's what coaching is. It's about kids. It's about loving kids and knowing that you can make a difference in your life. I love what Coach said. Coming in, I'm going to love you regardless of how good a player you are or not, whether we win every game or not. The way I feel about you is going to be the same, and that's what coaching is. And it's about making that kid better in some form or fashion. And it takes a whole community to raise a kid, but coaches have a big influence, making them better when they're 30 and 35 years old, helping them be a contributing citizen in our society, in our communities. And I think those are some of the questions that young coaches need to ask themselves. Am I doing this to get my name in the paper, to do this? And it's great to have goals, and it's great to have ideas of what you want to do, but we always have to keep our ego in check, and I think humility will do that. So that's a couple of thoughts that I have for young coaches, and some of the mistakes maybe I made, and what I look for when I talk with kids is exactly what Coach Simpson said.
Well, I tell you what, I appreciate both of you gentlemen, Coach Kenny Simpson from Southside High School, Coach Philip Haywood from Belfry High School, taking the time out of your busy evenings and away from your families to share some of your insights and your knowledge, and that's really why I wanted to do this as a platform. I just have one other. I would be remiss. A friend of mine, Coach Haywood, that has followed your career, told me he would be angry if I didn't ask it, and I guess it's one of those CNN kind of questions. But you've been at it for a year or two now. How much longer do you think you got left before you decide to go ahead and hang up the cleats and the headset?
Oh, yeah, I've got a good answer for you, too. I'm good for another year.
I knew it would be that. That was in the book. Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, I'm sure Linda has the patience of Job, and in being I have I have a coffee cup that it's my mom and dad's house. It's one of my favorite cups. And it says, "We interrupt this marriage to bring you the football season." And I think that, I've heard coaches' wives called the widow club and all that kind of stuff. But I think integral to every man's success as a coach, or woman for that matter, but certainly in our case, men, is a wife that understands the passion and the purpose that you guys have just talked about for the last hour. So, again, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. I will reach out to each of you offline because I want to be able to send you a little complimentary T-shirt as a thank you, even though that's probably the last thing you need. I'm sure you've got a few T-shirts, but I really appreciate you guys being here. So, thank goodness for coaches like you too. I appreciate William bringing the show. And what I want to say to our fans and followers are, remember, if you're out there doing something for the game of football, make sure you're doing it for the good of the game. Take care and God bless.